Welcome, everybody, sisters and brothers of the brush, and welcome to a new video where I'm going to do something very special to celebrate that we have moved to the new academy on the new site. And I'm celebrating because I'm super happy because finally we are at home and this is something to celebrate. So I'm going to do something to celebrate this, which is a tribute to the intention of the first video we produced, that it was the ogre bust. And I encourage you all to move, if you have not done it yet, to the new website and think about it. Why? Breathe, think, and you will realize your big mistake if you don't trust me and go to the new academy site, because it has a web video browser, it has community, it has much easier features to search for anything in 3 clicks, and Twitch channel, and also because I have spent all my savings on doing something really good for you guys. So please do it or you will go to hell, all of you. It's difficult to translate this from Spanish, it doesn't work very well in English. I'm so sorry, but well, yeah, I'm crying right now. Yeah, you know why I'm crying? Because you're not moving to the new site. Go to the site. Go to the site. Guys, move to the side. It's better for everybody. Please, guys, move, move. Oh, okay. Thank you very much. After this crying, we are going to celebrate the new release of Twitch channel. We are going to celebrate the new website, miniatureartacademy.com. We are going to celebrate new teachers like David Arroba. We're going to celebrate the new pledge by David Basilisk, and we can celebrate many other things that I could tell you, but we will wait a little bit more. So in the future, we will continue celebrating because this year will be super, super, super special. And I am so happy that I cannot even translate this into English. So, how can we celebrate this? Can we do a kind of like semi fuck smoothness video linking to the first video I produced 3 years ago with this ogre bust that many people liked it. Many people thought that it was a little bit of a brain explosion somehow. So you're going to have something similar, but even better, because you are going to have all the explanations. And however many people will call me a crazy man, will call me an heretic, will call me a weird guy, will call me not a good painter or something like this, I think that we have already produced enough classic stuff with enough traditional explanations that I think it will be a breath of fresh air with this new fact smoothness. So this, it will be considered somehow like a new sketch session. In this case, with a timer. Normally, when I give classes, weekend workshops, and all the attendees of these workshops knows that I used to paint a bust in 90 minutes. Well, 90 minutes is not much time to paint, so I accept that this could be something a little bit hardcore for some people, a little bit too extreme or too difficult. So we're going to do something easier. Instead of 90 minutes, we're going to work this on 3 hours. It might take longer because I will use this Sergeant Connor from the sculptor is Ivan. Well, I don't remember the name. You can check it on my Instagram. It's published, right? And most of you have seen the version that Marmas Clans painted, which is an amazing sketch. But in this case, we're going to do our own sketch in 3 hours. And for all these people that commented on Marmas Clan's piece, telling that it was the first time they saw this kind of artwork, are you sure, guys? Are you really sure that is the first time you see it? Well, guys, I've been doing this for years. I called it fuck smoothness, but it's basically an sketching method. Or it could be also interpreted as something finished if we consider that styles and I'm not talking about one style instead of diversity of styles, is necessary to grow any art field. And in this case, this was always my intention, explaining this fog smoothness concept from the very uh, beginning of this decade. From I started this concept in, I think in 2013 or 2014, with something that has been explained in dozens of talks on inside events, on articles, on long speech or long reading writings on Facebook, Instagram. Well, I have explained it so many times that I was so tired that at some point I decided to write it down properly in my book. So it's in my book written. For all the people who needs a manifesto, the manifesto is written there, and this is based on two concepts. The first concept is Impressionism. The second concept is Expressionism. Here is the book. You can see it. Don't tell me that it's not beautiful. I think it's so beautiful. And you can use it to equilibrate a table that has a problem on one of the legs. You can use it as a weapon to smash somebody's face. You can even read it, guys. You can also read. And here you have in the fifth chapter, the fog smoothness chapter, where I develop through many lines and paragraphs, and I explain exactly what I wanted to say, based and justified not by my words only, instead of by the words of real masters, because I'm not a master, but these guys, they were masters: Vincent van Gogh, Cézanne, Picasso, Gauguin, Delacroix, many people, many great painters, that they were somehow saying key sentences or key sayings that justify this treatment of the color, of the brushstroke, and even this treatment of or this development of the paint through the speed, which is also very important. How I understood these concepts and how I translated through my color choices, my aggressivity, my concept of painting, including the idea of limiting the time with a timer as an exercise, because this thing is so important, because can help you in two ways. The first one is to help you to develop your brushstroke, your expressivity, your how can I say it? You're willing to express yourself in a fast way and vomit what you feel and what you want to convey, without being limited by the necessity to blend everything. That is one thing. But also it will develop your technical skills, because if you see, and this is even more common every year, it pass, and this is my little smile, when I see all these masters of the new generation, like Arnau Lázaro, like Aitami, like Marmas Clans, or when you see a zoom in on one of the pieces by Kirill Kanaev, but even the old generations like Rusto, like Diego Ruina, all these guys are based, guys, on brushstrokes. And brushstrokes are very important. This is not what you think I'm doing. I'm not masturbating something very big. No. Instead of, I'm making this shaking the liquor, like I don't know what's the this movie from Tom Cruise where he basically prepare liquors. I don't know the name in English, which basically is to combine certain concepts, mix them all together, and put them to play in the game very effectively in a short amount of time. Obviously, if you want to paint like masters of blending, like, I don't know, maybe Albert Moreto, for example, or Darrell Latham, or people like this, obviously, this is not your inspiration. This is not your source of, or not, well, I wouldn't say knowledge, but at least this will not be something to mimic or imitate, right? But if you like how some other masters, like for example Arnau Lázaro, which is one of my favorites right now, works, or myself, or Sergio Calvo, or Marmas Clans, or well, many indeed, most of the painters in the world that are highlighting recently, they base their artworks on brushstrokes. And this is not something unique. This is something common and very normal in the painting art field, because the brushstrokes represents personality, represents volumes, personality of the painter obviously, represents better volumes, represents rhythms, represents feelings, represents many things. So at the end, a brushstroke is a tool, is a resource that we need to know how to use in order to improve as painters, because our goal in this case is limited by a time, by a certain amount of time. That means that instantly you have to develop your brushstrokes better to do as much as you can in the less amount of time. So I hope that this makes sense, because it's crucial, it's mandatory to understand, and also it will help you to improve your attitude to confront the painting. Also, this can help to all the painters that wants to focus themselves in wargaming, because at the end I cannot imagine myself painting an army of 100 figures and spending maybe 3 years of my life, because probably I will kill myself if I have to do this, right? So at the end, uh, either if it's a matter of developing your skills in a better way, or to understanding the volumes, light, color choices better, because then you have to simplify to execute things in the less amount of movements. Either if you want to just to speed up your time, or to understand great masters, for example, like Monet, for example, uh, you should definitely try this method, and you should definitely try this attitude somehow to confront the paint, because as the impressionist master said in the past, um, they developed this brushstroke, these quick brushstrokes, to be able to either finishing at the end in their studio, or to let it as a final product that was captured somehow instantly, very fast, because they need to do that as soon as they want to study, for example, a landscape, and they had only a brief amount of time, 2, 3, 5 minutes, maybe 10 minutes, maybe 15 minutes, because otherwise the light or the mood of this moment left and goes. And this was the main introduction, or the main implement of the impressionism on the art field of the painting, right? On the painting art. Uh, and indeed, nowadays we use this concept, and we have refined this into the technology side. Like, for example, pixels are based on the concept of stippling. We call it puntillism. I don't know if this is the name in English, but it's based on dotting, stippling, like working all the shapes, all the volumes, or the lights, or the colors, just by adding steeples, or steeple, or dots next to each other. So this was the inspiration also for people like, for example, Kirill Kanaev, probably the best painter in the world. He mainly used stippling methods. Why? Because he also based his knowledge on the classic art, and in this case, the Impressionist taught us how to deconstruct the things that we saw, or that we see, into a more simplified version that then we have to apply through the filter of our brain and then our hand. We have to apply this into a canvas, and in this case the canvas is the miniature, and either if you use a stippling method or a cross-hatching method, or, well, let's say different kind of brushstrokes, at the end, the concept is the same, is what I see or what I feel or what I want to transmit or convey the message, to do it super fast and to represent it in the less amount of brushstroke possible, because this will be either the best way to have a starting point to then resolve it in the studio when we have more time. Over this sketch we can continue working, or it could be also like a final product. And most of you will say, yeah, but if it's not completely blended, maybe I will not win a contest, or I will not have the approval of the people. Who gives a, you know what I mean, right? Who cares, guys? I can promise you that if the final result is beautiful, it doesn't matter if it's completely blended or not. And the result of this exercise will prove that. Indeed, I can tell you that I have sold more sketches in my life than final pieces that were refined. Obviously, a more refined piece, it will be more expensive, it will be more profitable, but also it will consume maybe 10 or 20 or 30 times more than a sketch. And the good thing is that in a sketch, you can do beautiful things, and that most or many styles like Red Dead Redemption, for example, or San Andreas, GTA, Grand Theft Auto, are based on this concept as well. In this case, is a concept of cell shading method, but at the end is the same concept of simplification. Seeing something or wanting to represent something that then we will simplify it into the less amount of information that we can. Like, for example, my arm is divided in one plane on the top of shadow, light in the middle, and mid shadow on the bottom. 3 planes. You can understand my arm as something more complex with a full gradient, or you can understand my arm with just 3 brushstrokes or 3 color blocks. If it's a color block and you want to make it completely defined, it will be like a cell shading concept that I will develop as well, a video just speaking about that. You can do, starting from this, something much more refined, like Raphael, for example, or you can keep it like more sketchy somehow, like a final artwork, like, for example, Frank Miller, for example. But we can use this in 2 ways. This is the key. So we can start with the impressionist intention, which is basing my experience on fast brushstroke, aggressive brushstroke, expressive brushstroke, to recreate something visual, something that we can maybe observe. Or we can use the concept of expressionism, which is use our inner vomit, what we feel, to transmit something very fast, like Munch, for example, the shout, the cry of Munch. Check it. You can also understand these sketches in 2 ways of how you work on them. You can do it as Marmas Clans, for example. You should check the Connor he painted um, to have this on mind, right? Which was based, and he said this in a few interviews recently, that he studied the style of a concept artist of the world of video games or movies or something like that he liked it, that is based on brushstrokes, and then he painted the figure in his brain, on his head, for a week or for 2 weeks, and he was somehow like simplifying and reducing. Like, imagine that you have a final version of the face completely rendered, like if it was a real face, and on his brain he was for a long time like simplifying and reducing the amount of information that he thought that was not needed, to a point that he left just the minimal amount of brushstrokes needed. This is one way, is the most rational way of thinking, which is also very complex, because for this you need to have a mastery about painting. But also, you can do it in the other way around, which is the one that I'm going to show you right now, which is basically based on the opposite, which is a pure fuck smoothness exercise. And I call it fuck smoothness for many reasons that you can, and I suggest you to read the book. Maybe you don't want to buy it, lend it from a friend or something, and read, because it's a one day I can make a full video about this if you're interested. Leave it on the comments if you want me to explain deeply what it means and what I wanted to say with that. But it was basically just a claim to tell the guys, to tell the people, guys, girls, please lose your fear, be fearless, and just paint, have the experience and learn from this experience, and don't give a fuck, don't care about the smoothness as the final goal, because the final goal can never be this. The final goal should be to do something beautiful, should be to do something expressive, or to do something characterful. So the other way of working, instead of Mark Masklan's way, which is more reasonable to a point because he start from the final render that he has on the brain and then he simplified. My way of doing it, and I was probably I will bet that I was the first one who was doing this kind of exercises, or at least publicly showing it. Indeed, I showed them on in contest because I don't care about the awards. I care about the development of this art field, and somehow I wanted to represent and to show on the official events that this could be also something interesting and something beautiful, the same as Impressionists did back in that time, at the end of the 19th century. They brought this to the galleries and they were spit on their faces, but they persevered and they insisted because that was beautiful enough to be seen. And no matter if you like it or not, this is just another way of doing it, and it's just another style, or it's just another way of interpreting the painting. And for real, for sure, this is much more fun and somehow much more relieving. So my way of doing it, how it is starting from completely empty mind. Like if this was a rap battle, like a freestyle rap battle, something similar, where I have some previous tools that I will use, that in this case it will be mainly primary tones. Maybe I can add any other tone, but not much, like maybe three, four, five, six, a limited amount of paints. If it's the first time you do it, I suggest you to pick at least some colors that you feel comfortable, that they could be even like skin pre-made skin tones if you feel more comfortable. The first time you can focus more on the speed and on the volumes, the lighting and the brushstrokes, for example. But if you want to start mixing, is something that I also encourage you to try, because at the end this will be even more useful, probably more difficult but also more useful. So in my case I will take 3, 4, 5 colors, no more, and this will be my starting point. So despite the fact that you can start with a clear concept in your mind, like Marma's clans, maybe with an idea of a specific ambience or something like that, I encourage you to try in the other way around, which is starting from zero, no inspiration, no pictures, no reference pictures, no documentation, no nothing, just colors, and start blending to see what come out from the palette. Because when you start like this, and when you start developing the palette, you will have a kind of like talk with the palette that will help you to have a much more stretch link with the mixing, um, with the mixing process, right? So it's very, very important, because these freestyle exercises will help you in so many ways, that to me this is like the training for an athlete, the same as an athlete goes to, I'm sorry for the weird faces, but I I cannot translate exactly the same that I was saying in Spanish, because some things that they don't make sense. But basically this is like the training for an athlete, right? Where an athlete that runs, well, maybe this is not the best example, but maybe a footballer or a basketball player, they not only play on the trainings, they also do specific trainings. And this is my gift to the miniature world that I love, which is this exercise that I have developed for years in my courses, and that that some even some teachers, that were my students, they have developed as well in their own classes, and some of them even took it as a method of painting. Like for example, Matt DiPietro, a great American painter. He was my student many years ago in LA, in Los Angeles, and alongside with Anthony Wong. I think that it was the same class, probably. Yeah, it was the same class, right? And he liked it very much, this super fast approach, because he painted in different way, and now he had been doing these fast exercises and developing it under the sketchy style concept, which is basically the same thing, right? And you can see he has some good results, especially applied in his case. I think that he applies more into the wargaming side, which is great because is a nice way to tackle the subject. But you can also use it for display models, and you can also refine it more, right? So different approaches, obviously by different artists, it will be different results, but all of them are based on the same thing, which is sketching, or which is using the impressionist concept. So none of us, we invented it. I just brought it into the miniature world because I was an impressionist lover since my childhood. It's all explained in the book, and the impressionism conquered me many years ago when I was maybe 12 years old or something, and I went to France, to Paris, and this somehow dri- drive me or drove me to understanding the paint in such a, how I say, like explosive way somehow, if you can call it like this. Well, the first thing I've done is make a like a basic dark skin tone. It's a little bit brownish. Um, in this case, it will be like a mid value or something like this, and it was based on the three main colors. In this case, I was working with a primary blue, which is kind of like similar to a cyan, a primary red, and it was not primary yellow, but it was intense yellow, which to me is more interesting than the primary yellow of the scale 75 range. The reason why I have picked the scale 75 range of scale color artist is because of the density that helped me to work faster, and that helped me to extend the paint for more amount of time, so I don't have to be so much worried about drying the paint. Indeed, you will see that I paint much faster than how the paint dries, right? At the beginning of this process, I didn't have a hair dryer because it was broken, unfortunately. But you see that this has been done in 2 days. And the second day I bought one because this is very difficult to do without a hair dryer, right? So if you have a hair dryer, it will make your process much easier, and you can have it next to you and just turn it on or off. Indeed, I have a pedal like the ones that they use, the guitar players, these pedals that they use. I have one attached to the hair dryer, and I can turn it on and off with my feet, right? Quite easily. You will see how I will modify the mixture constantly on the same area. But first of all, I've done a big, uh, I would say, block of mixture, right? If you want to know the size of the palette, this is very big. It will be bigger than a A4 paper, and this is something that I suggest to all my students since more than a decade. I always tell them, guys, a big palette is important because it allows you to create much varied mixtures where you will somehow discover tonalities that you didn't expect it, because you are forced to mix faster and more aggressively, and because let's say that something bigger brings you more options, right? So I really suggest you, please trust me with this, because it's very important to change your palettes, unless you're going to paint with another kind of like step-by-step method. Obviously, if you're going to paint with a step-by-step method, you can stay attached to small palettes, but in this case, this will benefit this exercise. So you can use the lid of a Tupperware, something like this. This was the lid of a plastic case that they used to use for storage things, right? And now you're going to see how I mix on top of the face directly. because as everything is still wet, I can still modify it, right? At the beginning, the flesh tone, it turns a little bit too orangey. This is not a problem because on the initial stages, I am searching more for the luminosity than of the flesh tone rather than a specific tone of flesh tone, because I don't care. I will add many layers, and this means that maybe you could be afraid, but if you see, no matter how thick is the paint and how aggressive I am over the surface, you will see how at the end the result will be pretty flat, because you have to remember that the paint has a tendency to thin down and to reduce the thickness. So it will flatten by itself, and this super fast approach will help you a lot to, how can I say, to create a more interesting um, tonal variation over the whole surface of the flesh, right? Is super easy. Now it's looking a little bit like The Simpsons, but this is very easy to play with colors. Very, it will be very alive. You will see that your processes and your skin tones will become much more alive. And don't worry, I know that now it looks crap, but it will look fine at the end. Believe me. Uh, at the end, I am trying to, or I am aiming for a final view of something from the initial stage, from the sketch. So that means that if I can place all the colors at once, even if then they could be modified, like for example, at the end he will be blonde, but now he was brunette. Well, it doesn't matter. It's a matter of covering. So I suggest you not to leave anything without being painted. And suddenly, I was speaking with one of my pro members students, which is Wilhan, which is a fantastic painter, also from the US. It's pretty new, but he paints really great. And he was showing me one of his last pieces, and I told him to block all the colors at once. And he asked me why. I'm used to work with a grisaille. Working with a grisaille is a method, is great, but it doesn't help you to have an overall view of it. It's much better, especially if you are aiming for something more complete, and if you don't want to make a very just technical process, like if you were a machine. If you want to do something more harmonic and more organic, it's better to place colors everywhere in every single area of the piece. So at the end, we're searching for feelings. Now he looks a little bit like The Simpsons. Some parts or some patches of the color had turned a little bit too greenish, like the forehead. This has to be replaced. It doesn't matter. But you see that as soon as the color dries, it gets flattened, it's more flat and seems to be much more attached to the surface, right? But the most important part of this is that we need to cover everything. As you see, I have left a yellowish tone, which doesn't matter too much because as I'm going to work with several layers and some of them will have different levels of transparency, that means that this yellow will come through somehow, and that will offer me a more interesting luminous color base, which is great. Don't get me wrong. It's not that you have to do this, but you could. It doesn't matter. You see that those blocks that they've left more yellowish, normally they are related to an area of light, except of the face that has turned a little bit too greenish. And the reason is also that I did a few brushstrokes that they shouldn't, and I removed the paint unconsciously. It doesn't matter. It's not a big issue. You leave it dry and then you cover it again with another layer. Don't worry, these things happen especially when you are working very fast, that sometimes a color that you didn't see because you were going fast gets introduced on the mixture, and then you have to leave it dry. Don't worry, this is not a big problem, right? It's not. And obviously if you work with a hard dryer, everything will go even faster and it will be better for everybody, right? So the reason that they've done these tones, as you'll see, I have applied more red in the mid part. uh, the intention it was to leave more yellow on the upper part or the forehead and more green on the lower part or the jaw. There are theories or methods of painting, right? Well, I was talking there in Spanish about my regular table where I used to paint more comfortable. Doesn't matter. Don't forget about this. I'm doing a direct translation because we're a little bit late with this, and I want you to see this month. That's the reason why sometimes you can see me doing strong jokes that then will not be translated. Unfortunately, I don't know how even to translate this, so sorry for that. It's a little bit, I'm gonna say like. Also like a freestyle edition as well, that match, I think that match really well with the kind of content that we are producing this time. But also you have some other contents that were much more serious or much more specifics specific during this month, like the Imperator part 1 and part 2 that have been released only for the site members, only on the website. You can see that if you are part of the Patreon, you need to know that you need to move to the website to get access to these videos. Is the only way. Otherwise, you will not be able to see. But for example, this month, you have seen as well the theory about how to do cartoon hair style, which it was very, I say, like didactic some way that I explain it very deeply somehow. And in this case, I have decided to go for this more, I say, like loose exercise, because also I think it's important to switch the mindset a little bit, right? So, however, I will be explaining everything. I wanted to let you know that somehow as an artist, I feel that it's important to switch the mindset by time to time. Come back to the paint job. I have set up a timer. From now, we have spent 7 minutes painting this initial layer of this flesh tone, and as you can see, the display of the different colors or main color tendencies is very clear. Some areas are more yellow, some areas are more reddish, some areas are more green. In this case, and you could say why they are not very blue if you have a tendency of yellow, a tendency of red, and then a tendency of blue, no, that is the other primary. But it has an easy answer, which is you can have a tertiary tone, which at the end is the mixture of the three primaries, tertiary tones, right, that has a red tendency or a yellow tendons, or an orange tendons, or a green tendons, or a purple tendons. All of them are either primaries or secondary colors. But you could not find a tertiary tone that has a blue tendons. Why not? Because the blue represents the stronger primary color. And when it comes to a battlefield of colors, where he is fighting against the other primaries, either he wins, or if he loses and becomes finally a tertiary tone, is not blue anymore. So a tertiary tone could be purplish or could be blue-green, but never purely blue, if that makes sense. If this is not well explained or you don't understand the explanation, please ask me on the comment box and I will give a proper written explanation. Or be patient and wait for the video about tertiaries, where I will explain all these concepts perfect with a script, where I will be able to explain it more deeply, right? Sorry for that, but I hope that you will understand that this is a direct translation from an hour and a half, where I'm basically doing like instant translation, and this is a problem because obviously I don't know all the words in Spanish. I cannot translate them directly in English, and that is the only way to translate this. Sometimes we have, or sometimes I do scripts, but in this case it was literally impossible. So I hope that this will be visual enough that you will understand. But if you have any doubts, do not hesitate to contact me through the Academy site and leave a comment on the video comment box, and I will gladly answer you guys. As you see, I'm adding the second layer of skin tone. In this case, it could be 2 layers, 3, 5, 4, 10. It doesn't matter because they will flatten when they dry. So don't worry, especially when you're painting with matte colors, which is the case. These colors has such a thin pigment that the paint will flatten easily. So don't worry about losing details because you are not going to do it. But as you see, I'm not diluting, not much. It has a little bit of water on the brush body, but not much. So basically, I'm using full density to have the better coverage as possible. And as you see, I am mixing on top of the figure. Sorry that sometimes it can go out of the frame, but I hope that it will be enough. You must understand that this is one chance. We cannot repeat that because it's one exercise, and if I have to repeat, I have to repeat it from zero. So if at some point it goes out of the frame, very sorry. I have also modified, as you see, the the template, because in these FAC smoothness exercises, I think is great that you can focalize more, even more on the palette than the model itself. This is very important, trust me. And as you see, what I'm doing is applying the color and recovering the reddish tone, on the forehead, right? Leaving kind of more fleshy tone. It looks like a bronze flesh or something like this on the upper part, leaving more reddish tone on the mid zone of the face, and enhancing the green feeling on the lower part. You can even apply purely black directly to create a sketch of a casted shadow, let's say. And you can do a kind of wet blending by feathering, is probably the word, taking advantage of the wet surface to mix the colors. It's pretty simple to do that. It's pretty simple. I just suggest you to try. If you have troubles to do this, you have a key, which is the speed. Some people use retardants, which is a kind of like a tool, is a liquid that you can use to slow down the drying process of the paint. But I don't suggest you to do that, because if you do that, you became lazy and then you are dependent on this tool always. So what I suggest you is to use pigments that needs more time to dry. So what will be, in this case, heavy bodies. Heavy bodies, but also inks, they have a slower process of drying, right? So this will help to also to keep your mixtures alive for more time. And don't worry, because if you are thinking that those most of the heavy bodies, not scale 75 in this case, and not some other brands, but it's true that some of the heavy bodies became a little bit glossy or a little bit satin, and most of the inks, if not all of the inks, are at least slightly satin. Don't worry, because then you can use matte varnish in between steps. Matte varnish is not only for the last stages. Matte varnish can be applied in between. Don't worry. You will see how. Don't worry, because the problem of the frame was resolved afterwards. I'm gonna explain you what I'm doing anyway. Basically, I'm applying a glaze of red, because you will see that I will keep on adding red by time to time, because I don't want to lose the most reddish area of the flesh, because that will keep the feeling of the figure alive, right? So that is why this is so important. Most of the people, the main issue they have when it comes to mixing flesh tones, is that they leave the flesh tones very grayish, very desaturated in terms of color mixing. When we do a when we do an exercise of skin tones, we need to keep in mind that the red is very valuable. We should not lose the red. The red is the most important friend we have when we are representing skin tones. It can be a pure red, or it can be any kind of red, like a cold bluish red, like a purplish red, for example, or an orangey red. Both will work, right? Here's when I realized how dumb I was, that I was not checking the screen. But well, I hope that I have explained it properly. The reason why now I can work with more diluted colors, however, before I told you that I was not diluting the colors, now I am. And the reason is that the previous base, it was already settled down. That color, that previous flesh tone layers, 2 layers indeed, the color was solid enough and completely dry. And that means that I have a surface that now I can work with several different dilutions without any problems. While if you do it directly on top of the base coat color, let's say not base coat, the imprimación, I should the black spray or white spray or gray that we use to base coat the first base coat. If you do it too diluted on top of this, then it will take ages to cover. But if you first go very aggressive and you use a thick base coat layer, and we call it base coat layer because it's a base coat, capa base. What means capa base? Capa base means base coat, nothing else. It's a color, a solid color with no transparency. It means no dilution. On top of this, then you can start adding other layers with different properties, and in this case, also with different dilutions. Like, for example, we are doing here, where we are combining different dilutions, and that's the reason why I show you the paper, where you can see or you can check the different transparency and how I apply the colors. I don't suggest you to take this as a must do, right? Just to learn or to observe that I change or I switch the kind of different brush strokes, but also different dilutions, and how I extend the paint in different ways. I don't move the brush in the same or with the same exact movement all the time. And that keeps me away, that keep me away from being too let's say too obvious or too predictable, right? Also, it will bring a much more alive feeling, which is also very, very important. And you can see which decisions I'm taking and how I'm mixing on top of the same development of the color on the palette. You will see how I will be changing and varying the tonalities by adding a little bit of this or a little bit of that, right? So maybe you can watch this video several times to take some notes, right? Obviously, it's not possible to explain every single decision because this is more a vomit uh, rather than something pretty much thought. But if you check what I am doing, it has total sense. You know, I am adding more yellow tones to the areas where I want to concentrate more light or more luminosity. I want to differentiate between the two concepts because luminosity is something that belongs to the pigment and the color, which is the capability to show or to express light through the color. Like, for example, yellow is a color with a high luminosity, but value or brightness is how bright is the color, which is a different thing. You can create lights through luminosity or value, two things. Through luminosity will be through the pigment and the strength of that color to represent light. Let's say some greens like apple green or lime green, you know, greens that are very alive, or fluor greens or things like that. Oranges, some reds as well, and mainly yellows. These colors has a lot of luminosity. But you can also create light, which is the most common way to do it, with value, which means brightness, which means how bright is the color, right? In this case, I am keeping away from brightness. Why? Because I want to saturate these initial stages of the flesh. As soon as I'm going to go further and as soon as I'm going to advance in this exercise or this development, you will see how I will be introducing more white in my mixtures to bring the color up on the value range. But in this case, I wanted to keep the color as much saturated as I can, considering that obviously we're painting with tertiary tones that are by itself defined to be desaturated, because we have also two concepts of saturation. The first concept of saturation would be how much we have of something, you know, like the quantity of something. We are saturated of money. We have a lot of money. We have a very saturated green. We have a lot of green, but also this green is closer to his primary green. What means it's not corrupted. It's a color that is very pure. So here saturation is related with purity and vibrancy, and how close is this color to his main family member, which will be either a primary or at least a complementary color. Primaries red, yellow, blue. Complementaries or secondary colors green, purple, orange, as you all know, because this is very basic, and I think that everybody has learned this in the school, I guess, or at least in Spain is something like very regular for kids, you know. But sometimes we lose this knowledge because we don't practice it. So then we have to remember it. And we are here to remind you this, right? So this is the first concept of saturation. The second concept of saturation is related to the mixture. How pure is the color or how mixed is the color? So a tertiary tone by itself, it means is a desaturated color because it's not pure, because it's a color that came from a big mixture, right? In this case, the tertiary tones, they have a little bit of each of the three primaries, and that means that they are corrupted. That's the reason why some theories or some ways to explain the color theory, they call these colors corrupted colors, right? And in this case, any flesh tone is mainly, not every flesh tone, but most of the flesh tones are mainly tertiary colors, but they are also pastel, so they are double desaturated, because you can desaturate as well with the black and white range, which means the grayscale, right? So you can desaturate a color either mixing with another colors, if we consider colors as the primaries and complementaries. All the rest are tones, but colors as family members, that they have strong personality, that they are really well defined, they will be either primaries or complementary colors, and all the tones that are in between these ones. If you check a color wheel, you will understand this, right? If we mix a primary with his complementary, it means that we are mixing three primaries at the end. No, a primary blue, his complementary yellow and red. It means orange. So blue plus orange is the same as saying mixing three primaries or creating a tertiary. Is the same thing, right? So it means that any tertiary tone is corrupted or is desaturated by mixing. But a flesh tone is a specific tertiary tone that has been even more desaturated by adding white. White or black or gray, these are not colors. These are just levels of a gradient of grayscale, right? They are not considered colors. However, they come in pots. They are not colors. They are just levels of brightness, right? So as soon as you add any of these, especially white, you turn your mixture into a pastel mixture, right? And flesh tones are pastel colors, right? So what we do basically is we create the level of value that we want in each stage of the flesh tone, and then we can modify this by adding a little bit of red, a little bit of blue, or a little bit of yellow. And obviously, depending on what red, what blue, what yellow you add, the result will be slightly different. In this case, we are constrained by a very low selection of colors because we're using mainly three. You see that beforehand I've mixed or I have added another darker blue because I was realizing that with this primary blue, all the values that we will get from mixing, they will be like in the middle of the value level, which means like a middle level of brightness, right? But in this case, because I wanted to create also darker tones, I decided to go for the color of the primaries that represent darkness better, which is blue. And in this case, I took Prussian blue, also from scale 75. You have seen it some minutes ago, but it was translating. That's the reason why I missed this. I'm sorry for that. So what you're going to see is me basically mixing on top of the surface, sometimes going out of frame. I hate myself sometimes, but well, I explain you. Like for example, in the back part of the neck, what I'm doing is just adding more and more layers of colors and do a wet blending. technique that you can see right now. When you want to do a wet blending technique, either you control completely perfectly well the amount of paint. You can fail, obviously. Every good painter, even the best painters in the world, they fail. I don't know if you consider me one of them or not, but I can tell you that even Kirill Kanaev fails, probably much less than me. But also I live out of failing, and this is something that I enjoy a lot, because failing many times it leads me to a better place. And this is what is about this exercise as well, right? To modify things instantly, very quickly, taking decisions, very brave decisions, fast, effective, something that can also inspire you to lose your fear to try. Because obviously, the first time I did that, I was scared. And when I did it in a weekend workshop, and I thought, well, maybe it's the time to do something and take the risk. And I could fail drastically. Indeed, I did it in a little bit more than 2 hours. It was in Istanbul, in Turkey, uh, and it came out great. And the experience was fantastic because it was the first time I dared to do that. And afterwards, when I finished, all the students were like, "Whoa, my God!" They clap, and the feeling was fantastic. It was like being in a theater and doing some performance, something like this. After this, I took it as a custom, something that I do for training, even not only for showing you on a video. Now, by now and then, I repeat this exercise for myself, because even if I am in the middle of different processes that could be needed to be more refined, like I am doing right now, that I am in the middle of different box arts. I don't know if you have seen some of my recent box arts that are definitely technical box arts, maybe not the most refined technique of the world, but they're good enough. And even if I am in the middle of these kind of processes, I always like to do these fast exercises by now and then, because they help me to relieve myself, right? One thing that I have added at this stage, it was a hard dryer. This is what I was saying right now, that I really really suggest to have a hard dryer next to you, because and even just turn it on and leaving it on for 15 minutes at least, if you can pay the bill of the electricity, because it's very important somehow to speed up the process that much that at some point you must be able to be faster than how fast the paint dries, if that makes sense. This is somehow like the best way to know or to check if your understanding of the mixture and your understanding or your execution of the brushstrokes is at the level that you need to accomplish such a difficult exercise, right? But believe me, try at first. Try at least 2 3 times. You don't give up. Trust me. Okay. As you can see, the palette how it's developed right now. You can see that I leave some of the primaries or the colors that are more saturated in general terms. I leave them very pure, and it's a concept that they took from oil painting palettes, where I see that they used to leave blocks of pure color safe, without being touched, because this is important so that you can reload your mixtures by now and then. And that's the reason why I prefer also heavy body colors, at least for this kind of exercises. If this was a step-by-step process to do a non-metallic, I will definitely not tackle the figure like this. These were the colors, I just remind you. These colors were like primary red, intense yellow, vanilla white to substitute white because I didn't want the strongest white. Then Prussian blue and primary red, I said it already, plus black, right? These were the colors that I was using. And all those tones that has come out from the mixtures were these ones, right? I'm willing really to be able to buy a new camera for the palette. Hopefully, let's see if this new website goes well and I can invest a little bit of money on this, because I really want to focus more on the palette for the further videos, for the future videos. And now you see that how the colors had settled down, and how somehow there is a merging effect between all the layers. And you will see that all the development of the palette is translated into the figure. And as I have said, we have many different tonalities, from the greens that you can see at the beginning of this development or path that goes all along the palette. It starts with some greens, then it turns into some purples, and then obviously all of them are browns, but they are tonal browns. They have tonalities. You can see this green, for example, which is a kind of like military green. If you don't trust me, then I dilute it a little bit so that you can see, because when you dilute and you trace over a white paper, the white comes through and it reveals what is the tendency of a color, which is a good trick also. And now I am using this green, for example, to get some more greenish feeling on the shade here, and bring a little bit more luminosity on this area. Don't let it too dark, right? And you can see how I can apply the color in different dilutions. In this case is a glaze dilution. I'm just playing with it, it's not that I have to do this. I'm just showing you how the initial colors that were applied on the palette, that they were applied in full coverage, and that means thickness, that means density of the color, they are coming down, or they are being flattened, because the color is drying, it's starting to dry, so it's losing, the water is evaporating, and that means that now the colors I can get from this mixture, they are more into glazing shapes, let's say. And that obviously means that these new layers, unless you redo the mixture, that is a possibility, of course, uh, will be more or slightly more diluted. So now they are not base coats anymore, because a base coat has full coverage, and I don't have full coverage here. I have glazes or mid glazes. What is a mid glaze? Is a way to call it. That's it. It's not an official name. A glaze, as you know, is a very diluted layer of color. There is a very good video about glazes, how to understand glazes and how to apply glazes, that you can check on the academy. If you are on the new website, you will be able to browse it on the video searcher or video browser quite easily. In 3 clicks, you can have access to this. If you're still on Patreon, you will have to scroll down maybe 2 years to get to that point. That's the reason why, obviously, it's much better the website. Um, I mean, I don't think that I have to explain more, because seriously, we made an investment to provide you the content in a better way. So on the website, you will be able to search for that video. So if you don't know how to apply glazes, or you don't know what they mean, go to that video, and you have a ton of knowledge over about an hour of a video, right? So these glazes that I am developing right now, they are not base coats anymore. Remember, separating the concept of base coat, full coverage, from glazes. What is a half glaze or a mid glaze, or however it can be called, is something that is maybe not 80, 70, 80, 90% of water or thinner. It will be between 50 and 60, something that will be slightly transparent, right? So these two shapes of the paint will be available right now on the palette, unless I start adding much more pigment. And that's the reason why I always save and keep the primary colors or the main tones alive. And obviously on this palette, we can keep on modifying the areas of different tonalities, searching for something different. As you see, I'm changing the brown constantly, and maybe I adapt this new change to another area. Like, for example, let's say the hair, for instance, right? And you see that this layer that they have just applied, it has no coverage. It has, full coverage, excuse me, right? So you can even use this full coverage base coat kappa base kappa base base coat concept. You can apply directly into the surface, and you can even mix on top of the surface without many problems. because especially if you're using heavy bodies, you can do it also with like more flat colors like Vallejo or whatever, but then you will have to speed up the process a little bit more. But if you don't want to speed up even more, then you can use heavy body colors because they have density and they take more time to dry. So that means that you can change the color of any surface, especially if this surface has little like depressions or folds, where that it will be concave, and that means that the paint will still need more time to dry. Then you can easily modify the color. Like for example, I don't like the brunette dark hair, so then I modify into a blonde guy. Why not? Adding yellow because it's a tertiary tone. I add yellow on top of that tertiary tone. Yellow is a primary. I add it to in top of this brown color that was a tertiary tone, and I turn this instantly into a green ochre. This green ochre, it will be very similar to many uniform colors that you don't need to buy, guys. One thing is that you want to buy them because you're color collectors. Perfect, fair enough. But don't tell me anymore in your life that you need English uniform or Japanese uniform or something like that, because you can create it in about 10 seconds. So if you want to spend your money, fair enough, but don't tell me that you need it, because you don't need it. If you have primaries, you can get all these uniform colors quite easily. Obviously, then here I can hear the voices of all those people that, well, if I have to paint a full army with of Tau warriors that goes with Japanese uniform, obviously I cannot mix. Obviously, brother, obviously, if you're going to paint a full army, then fucking buy the English uniform, obviously, or Japanese uniform. But if you need to use this color for a certain moment, then you can mix it yourself. And I also have English uniform. Don't get me wrong. I also bought it just in case one day I need to paint a big surface, especially if it's a big surface that is not organic, that shouldn't have tonal variations. Obviously, I can also buy the color. But just to let you know that you can create these colors, right? I'm giving you resources, tools, deep content. This is what I want to teach you everything so that you can have your own resources and your own tools to develop your own style. That's the point. Now you see that they have added on the top a little bit of yellow and a little bit of white to bring more value, white, and more luminosity, yellow. So the mixture of more luminosity and more value means a color that represents much better light and that looks brighter as well, right? So you see that I'm basically creating the area of light of the hair and easily extending it. First, I place the goop of the color in the center, and then just with the brush, I can clean the brush a little bit, and just with the moisture of the body of the brush, I can make a kind of like wet blending method. This is super easy to do, guys. Do a gradient like this can be done by a monkey, by a 3-year-old kid, and don't get me wrong, this is not bragging or being. This is just to encouraging you guys to don't be scared, because blending with these techniques is so easy. Seriously, you cannot imagine how many students I have taught in the last 15 years, more than 1,000 live students in different cities all over the world, and at least the 60 or 70% of them, they had the same problem. They told me, we don't know how to blend. Why? Oh, because I don't know, I have been searching for tutorials on YouTube and Games Workshop tutorials, and they told me this and that. Most of them, they told you wrong things. Dilute the color. Why? The color has been created, and this is the experience from someone who has designed colors. I designed color for Scale 75. I designed the concept of chimera colors, not the colors themselves, instead of the concept behind, or the concept of the box. But I know about colors because I have worked with the chemistries, and I know how they work. And I can tell you the colors are designed to be used in different shapes. And one of those shapes the truth is that they come directly from the pot. You don't need to dilute all the time, right? So trust me, well, or don't trust me, but I guess that if you have arrived to that point of the video is because you trust me at least a little bit, right? So, guys, it's very important that you lose this fear of failing, because those are just toys. Those are just resin bits. This bust, I don't know how much it costs, but because they gave it to me for free, but maybe it costs, I don't know, 15 euros or 20 euros or something like that, no more. What happens if you fail? You can scrub the paint, you can remove the paint, you can paint on top. Guys, seriously, lose your fears. That is the best tip, the best advice that you can get from this video, right? And this series of videos, I hope that you will like it, because I am completely convinced to do more of them, because I want to show the miniature world that the roots where we have been based, or where we have been established for almost 3 decades, based on the idea that everything has to be, every color has to be applied in a thin coat or thin layer, with care, with a lot of water, with dilution. This is bullshit. This is bullshit. And many painters, they base their paint jobs on the opposite. Some of them they tell you, some of them they don't. But that's the truth. And you can see now on the palette how they reflect the light. If they reflect too much, this is another tip, another advice. When you see the palette and it reflects too much, is that it's flat, very flat, and that it has, in this case, a lot of water. But you can see how the light travels differently on the groups of color than on the areas that are more flat and attached to the surface, that these lights somehow represents the wrinkles of the paper. I don't know if I have explained this well. If not, just tell me in the comment box and I will re-explain it. But when you see that a palette that obviously is being looked from an aerial perspective, that you can see like rhythms of light, of reflections, that belongs to the wrinkles of the baking paper, that means that this layer of paint is very thin, and that maybe it has a lot of water. And when you see different sparks that are more concentrated in specific points, normally is because this paint is a group of paint. I tell you this because obviously the best way will be to have two cameras, one to show you the density of the paint and another one to show you the mixture itself. But in this case, we have to choose between these two cameras because we don't have so many resources, basically. Maybe, who knows, in in 20 years I will be able to have I don't know, 5 cameras to show you all the process. That would be a dream, definitely. But for the moment, I will be just with you, guiding you through the explanations. And obviously, my explanation, it will not be perfect, because my English is not perfect, because I'm not bilingual. But I hope that this will be enough insight into my way of thinking and way of painting and way of expressing myself and way of acting somehow, because this is related also with behavior and personality. And please take into account that I've been speaking English for already 1 hour and 13 minutes non-stop, and this is obviously not easy, especially when I am not fit enough with this, because obviously when I do a US tour or something like that, the first day my English is worse than my 10th day when I am speaking English 24 hours. Obviously my level of English get more fit or train, and then it's better. But in this case, we really thought that we shouldn't cut this video in many different fragments, because it lose somehow the spirit. So we have divided, I don't know if it was 2 videos or 3. So these 3 hours, obviously it will be at the end maybe like 4, because there are some like explanations that what I'm doing right now, that they were out of the painting scenario, right? And that's the reason why it take a little bit longer. But effectively, the paint job was 3 hours. You know, I was stopping the timer by time to time when I was explaining it, and the paint job finally it was 3 hours. I also plan to do a full episode we in 90 minutes. At some point I will do probably one in 2 hours as well, and one in 90 minutes, and maybe one in 20 minutes, to show you some artworks and some sketches that I have already done in 20, 25, 30 minutes, to show you what you can do in that amount of time, right? In this case, you can see how the concept of the face is already there, how the colors are patched, and how now that the different patches are dry, how they react. You can see easily how this is a transition of many is a transition of many different tones, that however they are patched and they are not in a full gradient, they are not, but the color, it has a variety that mm, makes it look very organic and very natural in a way, it's not just one color and the gradient of this color into another one. It's just a combination of so many things that are all of them working together to create a pretty convincing atmosphere, or a pretty convincing effect, right? And obviously this mixture, which is not something pre-made and is not something pre-thought, which is very important. All these variations that I have been creating them not randomly, obviously using my brain to think what could be needed, but based on a freestyle exercise uh, that at the end make it very reasonable. Because obviously, for example, when I see that for example, the mixture goes, let's say, to purplish, then I add a little bit of yellow to compensate, because yellow is the complementary color of purple, for example. Then I add a little bit of white and I bring the mixture up in terms of value, and then it becomes more grays and more pastel, but maybe it has a lack of red, so then I add a little bit of red or a little bit of yellow, and I keep on developing the mixture, reasoning in each step, but reasoning fast. I don't spend too much time on thinking. I just react, because this reaction, it will be very natural, and what I'm doing is training my I would say, like, effecto causa, my cause and effect, like my reaction to what is happening on the mixing palette, right? So you can see that how I am uh, interacting with colors, and how I am matching or linking colors, that if I need a bit of green, instead of taking a green from a pot, I create that green from the first initial colors. And that will be always better, because at the end you will have something that will be completely interrelated, or linked, right? So here we will differentiate two main concepts. One will be the value or brightness, how bright is the color in this long development, and then also the tone, what is the tendance of this specific area of the mixture. And then the tendance will tell you if you need that tonality, or if you need to change this tonality, and in that case which colors to use, which at the end is almost the same game of primary against a complementary. It means if it's too greenish, you can either enhance the green, adding more yellow or more blue, or not adding anything, or you can compensate with the opposite color, that in this case will be red, for example. If you have doubts about what will be the opposite colors, you can have the color wheel in front of you, and then it will be much easier. But trust me, as soon as you understand this, is a very simple rule, right? So for example, you see how here I'm creating quite easily different tonalities of gray. The gray colors are also called the ones that are tertiary colors. In some descriptions, they call them gray colors, because gray is related to the lack of saturation as well. And you can easily modify those gray tones, better than gray, let's say gray tones that are tertiary tones, by adding a little bit of this or that color. Like for example, you see that in this case, I never spoil a brushstroke. I never waste a brushstroke, because every tone that I pick can be used somewhere. And why I know this? Because obviously every tone has came out of the same primaries, and that means that these tones or similar tones had been already applied somewhere else in the figure. So obviously, if you want to keep yourself attached to pre-made pots, then do it, brother. Nothing against that. This is a way of painting. I really respect that. I often use it for especially for very technical processes where maybe I have to keep the same tone, exactly the same tone or something like that. Okay, but not because you cannot use any other method. Mixing method is the base of painting, and this is a fact, you know. So it's something that you can, even a blind guy can make tertiaries quite easily, because it's just a question of playing with the colors until you reach the tones that you want. Obviously, you can have some problems at the beginning, but I really encourage you to try, right? It is quite simple, right? So one of the keys, just to summarize everything, of the flesh tones is not to lose the reds or the oranges, not to make it too yellowish, not to make it too purplish, not to make it too greenish. These three will be the tones that you, or the tone tendons that you don't want. The tone tendons that you want is either red orange or red, or it could be red purple as well, right? These three will be perceived as like realistic or believable skin tones, right? So you have to take into account also that the colors can be applied with different transparencies or different dilutions, and that it doesn't matter the amount of layers that you accumulate, because at the end the paint will flatten, it will come down and stay more attached to the surface without any problems. And also there is another question, which is the colors, or let's better say the tonalities. Sometimes they could be perceived differently on a paper than on the palette than on the surface itself, because the color at the end is just a perception. If you want to know more about this, we will continue this process in the next video. Thanks for watching, and I hope that you found this insightful and useful. Tell me on the comment box, because we really appreciate your feedback. Thank you very much, and see you in the next video. Bye bye.